and welcome to the panel called this is the Nordic Nuclear Renaissance of Norway, Denmark, Finland and Sweden. And with me here today we have from Norway we have Sunniva, and from Denmark we have both Jens Christiansen and Mads Larsen, and from Sweden and Finland we have Thea and Simon here. And myself, my name is Johanne. I'm the chairperson and founder of the Danish pro-nuclear movement, and I'll be the moderator of this panel. And we'll just start from the other side, of course. Simon, can you introduce yourself briefly and what your background is and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. My background is in nuclear engineering, spent a number of years working in nuclear safety and licensing, and now I'm working mostly on trying to get new nuclear built in Sweden, so working on the business case and siting for new nuclear power plants. On the side of that, I'm on the board of the Swedish Nuclear Society, and I am the co-founder and chairman of a Swedish environmental organization that is pro-nuclear. So we were a number of people that were, let's call it dissatisfied with the existing environmental organizations that were anti-nuclear and anti a lot of other technologies. So we decided to start our own in 2019, and it's grown very successful. And together with Finland and other countries, it's now part of an international network of organizations called Replanet.
Yeah, and Replanet. Thea, you're with us here today, and you have a quite significant role in the Replanet. Can you introduce yourself and also talk a little bit more about what Replanet is?
Hi everyone, my name is Thea Törmänen. I'm a biologist and I've been environmentalist all my life. Like Simon, I was very unhappy with the traditional NGOs and their anti-technology, anti-science stances. So in Finland we started a little bit earlier. So we started in 2015, the first pro-nuclear, pro-gene editing environmental organization in Finland, and I was chairing that for 4 years. And during that time, we saw a huge change in the attitudes in Finland towards nuclear energy. And I thought, well, my job is done here, basically. And so we decided there were already 8 organizations across Europe that were like-minded, and we decided that we need to start building a global network. And now we expanded to the African continent. We have organizations in Kenya, Uganda, and even in Australia. So we become a global movement. And our slogan is liberate nature, elevate humanity. So we want to spare land for nature, but we also want people to do well and have a good standard of living.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. And now we go on over to the countries that doesn't have commercial nuclear, because of course Finland and Sweden have a long history of building nuclear reactors and being a part of their electricity grid. But Denmark, I'm from Denmark myself, but Mads, can you explain who you are, what you're doing, and what's Denmark's role in this whole nuclear renaissance in the Nordic region?
Absolutely. So I am a board member and speaker at the Danish pro-nuclear organization that Johanne started. I come from the cradle of anti-nuclear movements, which is Aarhus, Denmark. This is where the logo that says nuclear power, no thanks, was designed. Denmark is famous and often touted as one of the green leaders of the world because we have made significant innovations in wind turbines. We were the first country in the world to subsidize wind turbines in 1976, and we have one of the biggest wind turbine producers in Denmark. Since 2020, when Johanne and Thijs founded the organization, I shortly after joined, we've seen the tides turn in Denmark from a country that was vehemently anti-nuclear, basically basing its net zero ambitions only on biomass, wind and solar. Biomass is an often left out part of the Danish transition, but it actually makes up 35% of our primary energy consumption. Not electricity, but primary energy consumption, of which electricity only accounts for 20%. That is a very, very significant amount of forest each year that we burn to make energy in Denmark, and a reason that we in Foreningen Atomkraft believe we shouldn't call ourselves a green leader.
And then for Jens, you're also from Denmark, you're also a part of the pro-nuclear movement in Denmark. So short, who are you, what are you doing, and what's your background, and what's your motivation to talk about nuclear, especially in a country as Denmark?
Yes, so my name is Jens, and I'm from Denmark. I am a master's student of physics, atomic nuclear physics and data science, and my role in this organization is like digging up the things that we don't talk about. So I look at the data in the Danish energy mix, and I see that things are not as good as they talk about, the politicians, and even the Danish transmission system operator. They kind of they're not really talking about the state of the energy system, because they are also political in a sense. And so I really try to display these things, that wind and solar are only 10% of our total energy consumption, even though that we have been building wind turbines for 30 years. So I really see a great role for nuclear also in Denmark. We have a huge dependence on thermal energy, especially in the winter, because we have a lot of district heating. And we also have a lot of weather-dependent energy, so we really need like some firm sources as well. And yeah, that's what I'm working on in Denmark. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jens. And Sunniva, last but not least, you're from Norway. What are you doing professionally? I know you have a PhD in nuclear physics as well, but you also work for the new developing company called Atomkraft. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, what you've been doing before, and what you're doing now with nuclear?
Well, yeah, so as you said, I am a nuclear physicist, and I've been very, very passionate about science outreach ever since I started my PhD. And that has been about nuclear physics, which is much more than nuclear energy, physics in general, technology, and nuclear energy. And over the years, I've seen that I've done more and more about nuclear energy, and eventually I realized that I was a scientist, but I also had a strong opinion about nuclear energy. And then last year I was part of founding this Norwegian company called Christiansen, that really translates into Norwegian nuclear power, and we want to establish nuclear as part of the Norwegian energy mix, and eventually, if we manage, to buy and run reactors in Norway. And why are we doing that in Norway? In Norway, we have 100% of our electricity comes from hydropower, but the electricity is also in Norway only half of all the energy that we use in total. So also in Norway, half of our total energy use is fossil. And if we are to cut those emissions, nuclear power can play an important role also in Norway.
So thank you so much, Sunniva. And what we have experienced here at COP is, of course, that we have seen now 24 to 25 countries actually signing a pledge to triple nuclear generation towards 2050. And these countries, both Finland and Sweden, as we have over here, have signed this pledge. But this is only countries that are actually doing nuclear right now. So we see here in Norway and Denmark countries that have had research reactors, but they're into nuclear and researching if it is possible. But that, I would not call that a nuclear renaissance in Denmark and Norway. The renaissance may come from Finland and Sweden. So Thea, can you talk a little bit more about what is the plan for a country as Finland to do more nuclear in the future, and what is their commitment to this pledge towards 2050?
Yeah, so right now we're really focusing on cleaning up our district heating, because like in Norway, our electricity is already very clean, but when it comes to other energy we need, it's not clean. So we use in heating, we do have some heat pumps, like very large heat pumps that use wastewater, and then but then we're using a lot of biomass as well, like in Denmark. And we have a lot of trouble getting sustainable biomass because there's so much demand for biomass. It's like everyone's planning to do something with biomass, like in transportation. It's just, there's not enough of that for everything. Like we calculated that if we produced we would supply for all the energy like heating needs by biomass and also transport, we would have to cut down like 1/3 of the forest in Finland. We don't really want to do that. So the next move, the next step we're doing is getting district heating reactors online that can be deployed within city limits. They can provide only heat to the cities, so they're much simpler, much cheaper to build.
And concerning the district heating reactors, I know that in Finland at the Technical University of, I think it's in Helsinki, they're actually now pursuing to make a reactor sound solely for district heating. It's a 50 megawatt thermal reactor. Can you tell us a little bit more? Is this a realistic concept that will be deployed in Finland in the future? Or is this just one of these paper reactors that we hear so much about?
I think it's very realistic because we have a long history with nuclear, so we have a lot of expertise. I actually have a friend working, so I might be a bit biased because I have a friend working on this project. And we, as a movement, started the whole district heating reactor discussion in Finland back in 2017 already. So we really believe in it, and there was a governmental institution, VTT, researching this, and now they started a startup company called Steady Energy. They're collaborating with utilities and a lot of other people, so I think I wish them the best of luck. Their goal is to get the first online by 2030, and I'm really hopeful that will happen.
So we can hear that Finland is on record. They want to build more nuclear, they want to go into district heating and not only electricity production. But now Sweden, Simon, like Sweden is put up, like we saw Ebba Busch at the, when the industry pledge was used in the blue zone, they have to sign the industry pledge from the political one. So we had some, it was on last week where they had the political pledge of 22 countries, and then some days after we had over 100 companies signing this pledge as well. And then we have the Swedish energy minister, Ebba Busch, on stage talking about how Sweden is developing and wanting to build lots more nuclear in the future. So Simon, you have been here from the start. You are part of the Swedish nuclear advocacy. You help this country get out of their like nuclear fears and make them maybe one of the pinnacles of nuclear expansion in the Western countries. So can you tell us, what are your plans? Are you actually going to build new reactors, or this is just like empty promises?
The government has announced plans to build nuclear power equal to 2 large reactors, or 2,500 megawatts at least by 2035, and 10 large reactors by 2045. And this is part of a big expansion of our electricity grid, roughly doubling our electricity consumption, which there's large consensus is what is required to decarbonize our transportation sector and our industry, which are the 2 sectors that are today fossil fueled in Sweden.
So if you have a country as Sweden that has built nuclear, as we have heard on other panels and other talks, like Sweden, they actually managed to decarbonize their grid back in the 80s and 90s. They actually solved this big problem that a lot of other countries are struggling with now to decarbonize. So why did Sweden not go, like we have had so many years in Sweden where there actually been a negative sentiment towards nuclear. What happened in Sweden? Why did they simultaneously went from pro-nuclear to anti-nuclear and then pro-nuclear again?
Yeah, so a short history lesson or something. For those not aware, Sweden is a very long country. It's one of the biggest countries in Europe, but with a very small population, and everyone basically lives in the south, around 90%, and 70% of industrial electricity consumption is also in the south. So we started by building out hydropower, then there were protests against building out the hydropower, and we protected the last 4 rivers, and they're called national rivers in our environmental constitution. So they are not available to be expanded. Then we started building combined heat and power, but we realized that oil prices were scary, they could go up, and we also didn't want to be import dependent. So thanks to the foresight of our politicians back then, we decided to massively expand our nuclear program. So we built 12 reactors, around 1 reactor we built simultaneously. We had 1 reactor per 1 million citizens under construction at the same time. And this actually not only allowed us to decarbonize the power grid and electricity, but we also electrified heating at the same time. So we completely got rid of fuel oil for heating and coal that we used to burn to heat houses. So we actually also decarbonized our heating sector, which is a big challenge for other countries. This also set us up very well, because this was with direct resistive heating. You just heat electrical radiators. Then we swapped those radiators out for heat pumps, which now leaves a lot of air in the local grid. So on the continent where you have gas heating, you usually have 1-phase electricity going to your house. In Sweden it's always 3-phase. And this allows us also quite easily to electrify transportation, because it's not a problem to install an electrical vehicle charger. And it's not a problem to put solar panels on your roof, because the local grid can handle this. But we decided to phase out some nuclear. Also we had a tax on these combined heat and power plants. And following the closure of those 6 nuclear reactors and some combined heat and power, this is about 8 gigawatts of power in southern Sweden, we now have very major problems with our transmission grid. So we can't get all of that hydro and wind power from the north to the south where the electricity consumption is. And this causes very high power prices in southern Sweden, and it also causes major issues connecting new consumers. And what we see now, so one of the biggest industrial projects in Sweden is the decarbonization of iron production. So instead of reducing iron ore with coking coal, we want to do it with hydrogen instead. This requires massive amounts of electricity. So the biggest project with LKAB, the state-owned mining company, will require around 70 terawatt hours of electricity. This is twice the consumption of Denmark, or roughly 50% of what we consume today. And we see also a problem for industry to decarbonize in these sectors because it's very capital intensive to install these electrolyzers.
So what you're explaining now is that you are looking into a future with a big problem of electrifying your industries mostly, because you already solved heating, you already solved the electricity uses, and Sunniva, as you said before, like you have already solved these kinds of issues because it's the same in Norway, that you have electrified your heating and you have electrified, of course, most of your electricity usage. But these last 50%, for example, in Norway, you have hydropower. Why don't you just build more dams in Norway? Why do you need nuclear power? Isn't it redundant to do that in Norway, or just build out wind and solar and then just leave nuclear out? Do you really need it?
Well, do we really need it? That's a question up to the public. What do we need? What should a country do? Starting with the hydropower. So yes, it is possible to build slightly more hydro in Norway, but not. I mean, we're not even close to build out all that we need to completely electrify our society. So there is something that we can get there. The plan for now for Norway is to go all wind for the rest. The problem is that, well, there are several issues with wind. We do need wind also. I mean, I think that we need everything, every low carbon option that we have if we are to have any chance to actually reach the 2050 goals. But the thing is that in Norway, we are also a very long country, maybe even longer than Sweden, or roughly the same. But in Norway, we live all over the country. So we have people living in every little place you wouldn't believe that anyone would live. They're living people. And Norwegians are very, very connected to nature. Nature is a very deep part of Norwegian identity, I would say. And building wind farms is causing a lot of, I mean, it's, there you really see they're not in my backyard. A lot of Norwegians really don't want wind powers. So, since we founded this company a little bit more than a year ago, we have not had to go to anyone, but more than 10% of all Norwegian municipalities, politicians, have come to us and say, we want to learn more about nuclear power. In our municipality, we believe that smaller nuclear reactors could actually be a very good option because there's a strong opposition to wind, and we believe that nuclear could be actually very positive. So the debate in Norway now is that, well, there are of course strong interests in both from politicians and from industry to go into offshore wind, and I can see that. And some are afraid that we are sort of stealing the focus now and saying that, but what about nuclear? But so the people are not really afraid of nuclear, but they're saying, oh, but it takes too long and it costs too much money. So that's sort of where the debate is now in Norway.
And this debate about like it costs too much, it takes too much money, and you also talk about the aspects of nature. You talk about the aspect of actually land use, yes. Like having wind turbines or solar panel compared to nuclear. There's a large difference, nearly a 1,000-fold difference in area use of these technologies. But in Denmark, like we are the smallest country out of the Nordics. We have maybe the same amount of citizens as Norway, but we are 7 times smaller in area. And most of our country is covered in farmland, mostly agriculture, to 60 to 70%. And we're the country of the wind turbine. We have the adventure of doing like Vestas and Ørsted and building out offshore wind all around the world. Why can't we just build out more wind in the ocean and put solar panels on our roofs and just keep on doing that to decarbonize? Why is nuclear important in a country as Denmark?
Yeah, so I guess I can answer that. The thing about the Danish energy system is that for the last 20 or 30 years, we have been working on making it look good on paper. So we started building out a lot of wind, and we started phasing out coal. But what we did was actually just refurbishing our coal plants to run on biomass instead. And biomass was decided that it's carbon neutral on paper. And by expanding our wind, what we have done is we have really increased our share of wind production. But now we're reaching those penetration rates where it's getting harder to get that wind into our own grid. So what is happening is when the wind blows, we're just producing massive amounts of wind and exporting it.
And what you're saying with penetration rate, that's the amount of wind in the electricity system.
Yes,
so
exactly.
The share of wind in your consumption.
Yeah. And so that looks really good on paper, that we are producing so much of our, or not our power, but we're producing a lot of power from wind, but it's not getting into our own grid, because when the wind is not sufficient, then we do burn a lot of stuff, and we're also really dependent on importing from Norway, Sweden and Germany. So our actual energy system really needs thermal energy, and it needs a dispatchable source of energy, because when the wind is not sufficient, then we don't have enough power, and also in the winter we run our thermal plants all the time, so we cannot move on from here with only wind.
Is it that important to have nuclear in Denmark? For example, we are connected with Sweden and Norway and also Germany and the Netherlands. Could we just import the electricity when the wind isn't blowing, and when the wind is blowing, then just export the electricity to the other countries? Because the climate crisis is a global crisis, it's not a national crisis. So if Denmark just builds a lot of windmills and export it to the other countries, we'll help them decarbonize and phase out their coal. So why is Denmark? Why do we need to build nuclear in Denmark when we can just import electricity from Sweden or Norway?
There's multiple aspects of this. One of them is just the economics. When we export electricity, we do it at a price that is 5 times higher than when we import it, because when the wind blows in Denmark, it also usually blows in our neighboring countries. That has been shown by a graph made by this guy. Then there's the political aspect of energy independence. We are already seeing neo-mercantilistic, meaning unwillingness of our neighbors to guarantee our grid stability in times where there is a deficit in the Nordic grid. Norway has already announced that one of the interconnectors between Denmark and Norway is not being renewed in 2026. This interconnector sometimes handles 70% of Western Denmark's electricity consumption. That is very significant. And Sweden too, because of their electrification, they are also losing out on this surplus production. So we might be left literally in the dark from doing this. Then there's the matter of electrification. Electricity still only account for 20% of our energy system, and we have these coal-fired or co-heating power plants that produce both electricity and district heating simultaneously. These are not just bad for the climate, they are also horrible for public health, seeing as they emit their waste in form of particle pollution straight into the atmosphere and down into our lungs. They're placed around major cities because district heating is something that needs to be close to the consumer, because you're basically utilizing the waste or the excess heat that is not utilized for electricity production. So one way that we could really swiftly decarbonize a very large sector, the district heating sector, is by simply replacing these existing biomass and coal-fired plants with small nuclear reactors.
Okay, because what you're saying here is Denmark has a big potential for district heating, as you're saying, because we heard before that Norway and Sweden, they have electrified actually their heating, so they're not that reliant on the district heating part because they just electrified everything. But in Denmark, only 20% of the total energy consumption is from electricity. But isn't this just harder? Why should we do district heating? Why just not build a lot of heat pumps around the country and build a lot of batteries and power to X storage, and then do it all with wind? The argument of nuclear in Denmark, it seems a little bit more not that important as in Sweden or Finland or Norway, because they have intensive industries. Why do we really need it in Denmark?
So the Danish model of net zero nuclear is basically based on intermittent renewables, biomass, and then economic incentives to reduce consumption of energy. This is true that it has moved a lot of the heavy industries to other countries, and then we import the goods that are now produced abroad, and then they don't count in our CO2 emissions. So a really great carbon accounting model if you want to look good on paper. Again, Denmark is extremely good at this. The thing is, it is extremely important because we do still have industry. We have built this incredibly comprehensive infrastructure that was 100 million euros almost, just to transport this hot water. To just say, actually, we want to electrify now, is like buying an expensive machine and throwing it out after half of its lifespan. It's just not very good, I think.
Thea, do you think that the new explorations in only district heating nuclear reactors that you're making in Finland will also maybe have an importance in the Danish electricity grid, because we have such a high connection of district heating to our houses? Up to 70% of all Danish households are connected to district heating. Wouldn't it be a perfect case for Finland to work together with Denmark in some sense to do these kind of reactors in the cities?
Yes, we're definitely planning to sell these things to other countries with district heating networks, and Poland is another example, had a district heating network and where you could use these district heating reactors. So it's very important what you said, that replacing this district heating network, that would take forever and would cost a lot of money, would take a lot of time. We don't have time for that. The easier way to do it is to replace these power plants that we already have in Finland, burning coal or peat or biomass, and just plug in clean heat from nuclear reactors and just be done with it. We do use electricity and heating in outside of the cities, and there we can use heat pumps and other solutions. But in cities, it just makes sense to replace these power plants with something clean.
Of course, now there is a very in-depth technological discussion about if you need nuclear, if you don't, what is the energy mix, electricity, district heating, and so on, what we've talked about. But another aspect of this is public opinion, because you cannot have a renaissance in a country without the public supporting it. The Scandinavian and just Nordic countries are some of the most democratic and liberal countries in the world, so we need to have the public support to actually do this. So Simon, Sweden is seen as this front runner in nuclear, but do the public actually follow you in Sweden, or is it only a small association and big corporation that wants to build nuclear? What do the country think? What do the population think about new nuclear?
Sweden has always seen pretty high support for nuclear. It's always been slightly over half or around half of people supporting nuclear. What we see now is a complete hockey stick in public opinion. So for the past 2 years, for the first time on record in these opinion polls, we now see a significant majority, almost 60%, in favor of building new nuclear, and another 30% or so in favor of keeping the existing plants running. So we have around 90% support for nuclear power in Sweden. And we thought at first that this was an effect of the electricity price crisis and what was going on in Ukraine with the gas prices going up. But this has lasted now for over 2 years, I think. So it's really, it has stabilized on a very high level.
So Sweden is seen maybe as this front runner, and in some sense together with Finland in doing nuclear in the Nordic region. But what about Norway, Sunniva? Now you have started this company with a lot of other very good people from Norway and people from advocacy as well. But are you in touch with the population? You talked about the municipalities before. You have several municipalities, 10% of the Norwegian municipalities actually coming to you and being interested in building reactors. But what about the public? One thing is that a mayor comes to you and say, I want to build a nuclear reactor, maybe because he wants to make a statement or something. But what about the public in Norway? Are they also supporting nuclear?
Well, if a mayor came to us, then I don't think he would do that if he didn't have the public backing him. But yeah, we're not like Sweden yet. But if we go 10 years back in Norway, 9% of Norwegians said yes to nuclear, because why would we have nuclear in Norway? We were thinking 10 years ago. Norwegians are living in this idea that, well, we are 100% hydro, so why should we? But it's first now that people are starting to realize that, okay, that was just electricity part, but then we have the primary energy and we need to electrify all of that we talked about. And then also we've had the Ukraine war, and Norwegians have really for the first time felt European energy prices. And that has shown us two things. So one is that, well, yeah, now people are sort of, I mean, we're feeling it, and that is opening up towards looking at other options. I think that absolutely is changing, that people are more positive to look at nuclear. But if they only cared about the prices, then they should also be more positive to build wind power, right? But the support for wind power has just gone down. It's not going up, even if now for 2 years they have much higher prices. But the support for nuclear is going steadily up. So 10 years ago, 9% said yes. Now it's 51% are saying yes, but only 25% are saying no. So it's twice as many that are positive towards those who are negative. That's still not enough to do this, but it's all the time it's going in that direction. So I'm very positive, but of course I can't look into the future, but that's the way the support is now.
And for Denmark as well, because Denmark is seen as one of the most anti-nuclear countries that ever existed, together with Germany and Austria. We actually, as Mads said in the start, we actually created the nuclear power no thanks logo. It was a woman from the city that we grew up in, actually, Mads, Jens and I. So Jens, what is happening in Denmark towards the public support? Because Denmark, they can't be that positive towards nuclear. Like, it's a part of our national identity. What's happening in Denmark?
So just as in Norway and like everywhere in the world right now, we're also seeing a really steep increasing support for nuclear in Denmark. So 7 years ago, I believe in 2016, it was about 16% who were in favor of nuclear. But the latest polls show, like from spring 2023, we see around 50% support for nuclear and only 32 who are against, and then we have this about 20% that are like not knowing what to make of nuclear
so
yet.
There has been a tripling in the support
yes.
towards nuclear since 2016 in
yes.
Denmark.
And especially just like in the last 2 years, it has gone from some 30% to some 50%. So it's really going crazy right now.
Why do you think that's happening? Is it only because of the Ukraine crisis? Simon, he talked about before, like, you were afraid, not afraid, but a little bit worried that this might just be like a trend that was happening because of high electricity prices and energy security. But is this steady in Denmark? Like, are we seeing these trends keep on going, or are we going down now in support?
So I think that you have to look at what is driving the opinions on different energy sources, because the Kyoto Protocol left us with it left us with a source of firm renewable energy power, because suddenly biomass was green on paper. The thing is, biomass is quickly falling out of favor with the public. We've had many scandals with these massive amounts. Like, it was even discovered we are literally burning Brazilian rainforest at the biggest biomass plant in Denmark. So it's falling out of favor. And I think the debate is really opening up. And I think we see a very significant amount of people also worrying about climate change and learning that electricity only accounts for a very small part of this great puzzle towards net zero nuclear. So I think genuinely it's part economics. People are sick of paying very high electricity prices, and part philanthropy. They are also concerned with the future of the planet.
I have to go now because this panel was postponed 30 minutes. But I know that some of the participants in the panel wants to keep on talking until 2 o'clock. So I'll be leaving. I'll have to do a live radio show back to Denmark. But thanks so much to all of you for coming here today and speaking about nuclear. And thanks to Sunniva, Jens, Mads, Thea, and Simon, and all of you participating here and listen to these wonderful advocates of nuclear energy. And if some of you want to stay, just keep on talking, and maybe Richard, he can do a moderation of us.
Yeah, because you can go and then we can have questions if there are questions from the audience, because we're not just going to sit here and talk. And there's a question over there.
2 questions actually. One is for you, Sunniva. Norway's hydro reservoirs are particularly important also for energy storage. They are routinely used as pump storage from Denmark mostly, but also Germany sometimes. Basically, they sell their extra energy to Norway to store it, or even they pay sometimes because they go into negative prices when there is overflow of wind. and then they buy it back through the Norway hydroelectric dams. So is there an argument for building nuclear power in Norway in order to free up hydroelectric capacity for storage? And that's the first question that's for you. And then for the Danish representative, I don't know which one will take it, but probably you, because all the others are gone. We started your panel by highlighting the importance of the Danish wind energy industry. I checked the stock right now. Vestas plummeted mid-year, then recovered a bit, but it's still down 16%. Ørsted is down 54% since the beginning of the year, and another major wind power producer, wind turbine producer, which is Siemens Energy, German industry, is down 56% since the beginning of the year. So what's happening with the wind turbine industry?
So I can say something about the hydro capacity in Norway, because we've also had this idea that, but we could be the battery of Europe, and that is not we don't have enough hydropower capacity to be that when we are if Europe are actually serious about our goals towards 2030 and 2050, and we are going to go green. So and also what we see now is that as I already said, it is possible to build a little bit more hydro in Norway, but not much. And today, Norway, when half of our energy comes from electricity, and all that electricity could be produced from pure Norwegian hydropower, but then, of course, we are importing and exporting. But if we could... So if we build nuclear in Norway, if we could be more of like a battery for Europe in a way, that of course is possible to some extent. But now I don't remember the complete capacity of Norwegian hydro, but I know that in Norway our electric consumption is roughly 150, 160 terawatt hours per year. So that is roughly what we could produce from hydropower. So even if we produced nuclear and then saved all our hydro to use more as a battery, that still would not be close to enough for all of Europe.
Yeah, so regarding the wind industry question, your question was what's going on with the wind industry and the Danish wind companies. So the wind energy was kind of sold as this dream in a way, like the Danish dream and this harmonic dream that we can power the world with wind energy, and wind is an abundant resource, so it's going to be the cheapest energy source, and it's going to be able to be deployed really fast. And they've been selling this dream for like 10, 20 years, maybe even more. But now reality hit. So now they actually had to go and deliver all these projects. So they have been trying to work to stand on their own legs without subsidies and be able to deploy all these projects really fast. But then the Ukraine war started and material prices went up. And then because wind energy is really resource intensive, a slight increase in the material price really affects the price for the wind a lot. So what happened was that they promised they would build it cheap, but then when they actually had to deliver, they could not deliver that cheap, and they had to cancel like a lot of projects in America and in Denmark and Norway. That's a good question. I think that they will recover, but I don't think that their role that they had in mind they would play in the global energy mix, it's not going to be as important as they have claimed it to be. So yes, the bubble is bursting.
I have to add something as a biologist, because we're talking about hydro now, and not only we have a climate crisis, we also have a biodiversity crisis, and hydro plants destroy the river ecosystem. They destroy it. I did my master's thesis about killer whale populations in North America, and there's a population that's starving to death because the fish population has declined because of hydro plants. In Finland, we're now getting rid of some of the hydro plants, the smaller ones. Thanks to nuclear, we're able to do that because we want to restore these river ecosystems. So let's remember that hydro plants are not, just all nice and clean and fun. I mean, they do have an effect on the environment.
I think she was first. the trend is definitely moving towards nuclear, but it has its own problems because you'll have to mine for plutonium, thorium, uranium, whatever, and it can also produce radioactive wastes. So, what actions should be taken to mitigate or adapt to that?
Well, as all energy sources, nuclear will also produce waste, and nuclear will also produce dangerous waste. But let's remember that all energy sources produce waste, and they produce dangerous waste. If we look at how much waste you produce per terawatt hour of energy produced, there's no energy source that produces less waste or less dangerous waste. But of course, we have to deal with it. And well, maybe I should just give the microphone to the Finn here, because they are the ones that are leading in actually, taking care of the final place for the waste.
Yeah, so we have the first final repository in the world finishing very soon. So this is not a debate in Finland anymore. The Green Party has accepted, the environmental movement is okay with the solution. So what we plan to do next is to change the law in Finland. That's what we're advocating for, that we could start importing nuclear waste from the countries who don't want it, for good price, of course, and make a business out of it. So we have solutions. Mostly nuclear waste is a political problem. It's not a scientific problem. It's a political problem. And when it comes to mining, if you're worried about mining, then advocate for nuclear energy, because it requires the least amount of mining of all the energy sources compared to solar and wind as well. And you can do like in situ leaching. You don't have to do open mines. You can get it as a byproduct from other mining activities. So for me as a biologist, that's one of the reasons I support nuclear, because it requires the least amount of mining. Do you want to add some?
Yeah, sure. I should add that the final repository method is Swedish and the Finnish stole it. But they were more successful because of political reasons. So when we built out nuclear power in the 70s and 80s in Swedish, we wrote a new law called conditional law, which stipulated that to fuel any nuclear power plant, you had to have a plan for what to do with the waste. And so we investigated 3 methods. One was putting it in deep geological boreholes. One was putting it in these geological repositories a bit more shallow, like 500 meters underground. And the last one was recycling it and vitrifying it, like you kind of make glass out of it. And we settled, so this was in 1973 or 74, I believe, and we spent 50 years researching this in Sweden, and now we have also approved this final repository method, and next year I believe we will start building it, or at least very soon. And the method is, this has been the most extensive democratic process in Sweden. We have paid anti-nuclear movements to participate and to watch this movement and to file complaints and audit every part of it for close to 50 years. And every 3 years the government has approved the step forward and the plan forward, so there's been extensive chances to challenge this method. For mining, I would say, so nuclear fuel is extremely energy dense. So we have today 10 of the world's biggest uranium mines supply almost 60% of all the uranium to power our plants. So nuclear power is roughly 10% of global electricity. It means 10 mines supply 6% of global electricity, which is extraordinary. And there are, you could say there are 4 ways to get uranium from the ground. One is open cast mining, if you have uranium ore deposits close to the surface. Then you just dig from the surface ground. And the second one is underground mining, but then they have to be fairly high quality, so otherwise it doesn't pay off to dig that deep underground. And the second 2 are either in situ leaching, so you pump some kind of solution, either an acidic or basic solution, underground to dissolve the uranium from the rock, and then you pump it back up, and there's there's basically no intrusion on the surface, so very limited environmental impact. And the fourth one is you can leach uranium from heap piles of other ores. And one of the biggest uranium mines in the ore is Olympic Dam in Australia, which is a copper mine, I believe, where they leach uranium from the remains from the copper extraction. So uranium really has a very, very small environmental impact in terms of the mining required. And of course today, if you go to Google Earth and you zoom in on West Texas, you will see what mining looks like for real, because there they have fracking, and basically all of it is fracking wells.
Sorry, I want to say one more thing if you're finished, because one thing I personally really like about nuclear energy is that, as far as I know, it's the only source of energy that actually takes complete care of all their waste. And also, what you didn't say is also, how do you pay for it? Because if you only see the numbers, yes, it costs a lot to build one of these repositories, but you have to look at what did you guys do from the beginning. And I think you both, Sweden and Finland, had a plan from a long time ago where you put aside money. So it's not that you're not pushing this economical problem to future generation. This is something that nuclear is paying for by themselves. So when you look at the price of the energy from nuclear, that also includes taking care of the waste. Aren't I right? Yeah. So that's also very, yes. So if you only look at, when people say, look, it costs so much to build this waste repository, you have to look at what was the price per kilowatt hour produced and how did you get those money. And so Sweden did that, Finland did that. I know the US is doing the same thing. So this is, I mean, all over the world. You should have a plan from the beginning.
Thanks. Very much enjoying this panel. I just wanted to give a friendly challenge on the question of cost, because I thought you were quite negative about wind energy just then, and I'm not sure it was entirely fair. When you look at the 40-year trend, then wind energy is coming down a straight line on a logarithmic scale. And of course solar doing the same thing, going back much further. And of course we expect to see fluctuations around the trend. You get supply chain constraints, but they go up, they go down. Long term it's coming down. Over the 40-year trend, the cost of nuclear has gone up. So what do you guys think? Because also batteries are coming down as well. You've got solar, wind, batteries all going down. You've got nuclear going up. What do you think of the future of costs in nuclear? Do you have some reason to believe that the cost can come down instead of going up? And what gives you that confidence?
Yes, so I'm very confident that the cost of nuclear is going to come down. So when you think about what's the reason for these cost curves coming down for wind and solar, it's because they have been heavily supported by governments and they have been deployed a lot. People have been investing billions of dollars into these things. That's what have been driving these costs down. When you see the price of nuclear going up, I guess you're referring to that. Yeah, there's a kind of famous graph going around, and that graph for nuclear, the price is actually only for one nuclear power plant that was built in the United States, that to date is the most expensive nuclear power plant that has been ever built. So the last 20 years, very few nuclear power plants have been built in the West, and very few dollars have been invested by governments into these things. But I'm confident that we see 22 countries are actually going to triple nuclear, and that is going to drive the cost down a lot because of economy of scale.
May I add something? I'm sorry if I interrupt, but I would like to address the gentleman's question. The cost is a variable that is important for investors, but not for the people. In your electricity bill, you don't care about the cost, you pay a price. The cost sets a minimum price, but then the price is set by the demand-supply balance. So renewables can be for free. The cost of renewables can be free, and you can still pay a super high bill because they put constraints on the supply-demand ratio. Because on certain moments of the day you have an oversupply, that means the price goes negative, and the government has to intervene with subsidies. Otherwise, the producer don't make money. And in other moments of the day, you have a constraint on supply with high demand, and the prices skyrocket, and they go up to thousands per megawatt hour. And we've seen it happening. Like last week in the UK, it crossed £1,000 per megawatt hour. So while nuclear, because it has a steady generation profile, sure the cost might be higher, but the price will always just be a little more than the cost because of how the demand supply works. So renewables cost very little, but they end up giving you a higher price.
Thank you very much. You just said that. So it's not the people who are building the power plants that decide the price of electricity. It's a market that decides. We have to wrap up, but you want to just to finish, and you can get the concluding remarks on the price and everything before we leave the stage.
Yeah, I will just add, what investors care about is value, not cost. So it can have a cost, but the important thing to an investor is the value of this electricity. And this metric that you're talking about, levelized cost of electricity, is really developed to weigh different dispatchable generators with a high fuel cost in regulated markets. We are now trying to use the same metric to weigh different types of energy sources like renewables, which have no fuel cost in deregulated markets and which are also highly variable depending on the weather, and it's really not well suited for it. So a lot of new measurements are being developed, like value adjusted levelized cost of electricity, to try and capture what the value is and the cannibalization factor. So what we're seeing, for example, in Germany and Netherlands is you have a lot of solar, but all the solar produces at the same time. So the value that they capture is very, very low. And for industry, many people say, well, the industry can be flexible, but that flexibility is a resource that costs money for industry to invest in. So you can imagine on one side you have an optimum, which is 100% nuclear. You can run your electrolyzers or your industry flat out 100% of the time, 24/7. That is these industries are capital intensive, so you want to use them all the time. This is optimum for them, but will probably be slightly more expensive because nuclear is more expensive. The other extreme is you have 100% wind energy, and then let's say it's windy 20-25% of the time, and you're planning on using only free electricity when the price is zero. But then to produce, for example, the same amount of hydrogen as running 100% of the time, then you need to build 5 times as much electrolyzers. So you have a much higher capital cost, and this capital cost also cascades down, because now you need 5 times the grid connection, you need 5 times the compressors, and that is a big problem that makes it very expensive. So somewhere in between these two extremes there is an optimum where the cost of the flexibility is more than offset by your savings by capturing a lower electricity price. So a perfect mix for the electricity system is really a mix of these resources.